Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Pod Strickland. I'm your host Shwin and in this episode 303. I am joined on a very nice Monday morning by my co-host Stacy. That is at StacyPat89. Stacy, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Happy Monday.
Yes, very happy that it's Monday. Very, very nice. Very excited for a full week ahead of us. But before we get started talking about anything, do have to make a few announcements. The first being that the Strickland has an Instagram. Check that out. That is at the strict.land on IG. We're posting all kinds of new content on there. The Strickland also has a YouTube channel, which you may or may not be subscribed to. If you haven't done so already, please hit like and then subscribe to the channel. That would be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise. You can check that out on our website. That is at thestrict.land. And there's a link at the top to take you to the store. You can get t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we got it. And then finally, the Strickland has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland, this podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to the Strickland mailbag, hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, aka the Doug Bag, that comes out every other week. He does that alongside of Dallas Amico. You also get access to the Strickland Discord, where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Stricken Roll, my solo pod where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Those come with a variety of additional benefits like listening in on pod recording to merchandise discounts and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours. Truly, one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not, none of this would be possible without you. So, without further ado, let's get started. The Knicks did not play a basketball game. The Miami Heat did. They won because they're fucking assholes. And
Just when you thought they were out,
just honestly, the most annoying fucking team to ever exist. I don't know what the hell the officiating was in the second half. I actually thought that was really, really bad. But they won because they apparently now have random games where they shoot 48% from three on high volume, which is fucking ridiculous. But we can talk about that. But I guess we can talk about the big news that dropped over the weekend, or the biggest Knicks related news that dropped over the weekend, which is that Julius Randle is undergoing ankle surgery. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
um, I mean, I think that I think there's been a lot of backlash. I think it started with people saying, "Oh, that's why he played bad," and then people got mad at that and said, "Well, he should have sat." And the truth is, like, to me, all of this feels a lot of the conversation around it feels a little unnecessary. If it's ever come into question Randall's how much he's cared, or his I don't even think his work ethic has really been a concern. Even last year, his conditioning definitely looked on another level this year, and it really looked like he put in even more work. But I don't think there's ever been concerns about that. I don't think there's ever been concerns that he won't play through injury. He's been an Iron Man. Doesn't miss games. So I think a lot of the conversation to me is, you know, can you win with him going forward? And does this injury change how you judge the playoffs? To me, it's like, a lot of the shortcomings are not new, right? The things I have said this on this pod. He either needs to show that he can display the decision making to be a true number two option on offense, or he needs to be a high impact defender. Not even, I mean, he was not even good on defense this playoffs, but he needs to impact games on that end if he's going to downshift on offense if they get another guy next to him. Um, does the injury change how I judge that? Some of the really poor effort on defense and some of the rebounding miscues he had, particularly I think it's game 4 against Miami. Those were very those maybe I can buy that. His effort was impacted on defense, right? Even though we've seen that in the past, even when he's healthy. But I'm willing to say that it probably affected him a little bit there. I don't think his issues on offense were related to a lack of it. Maybe he missed some threes that he normally hits. But I think, like, we saw him, make some explosive plays. I don't think that's really what caused him problems on offense. I think it was decision making. He chose the wrong times, I think, to attack Bam. I thought his decision making was actually better in the Cleveland series than the Miami series. Game 1 of the Cleveland series, I thought he had really good process, even though numbers weren't good. But the long and short of it to me, do I think that on offense his issues are related to his injury? Not really. I think it's issues that we've seen where not handling double teams particularly well, not being a good decision maker. I don't like in transition. He often looked like a deer in the headlights in that Miami series. How many charges did he have? And maybe that's ankle related. I don't think that completely. I think it's just in
Well,
when
everybody knows your ankle is connected to your brain, so
yeah, and then it's just so I don't doubt that he's playing through a lot of play. Maybe I haven't obviously been in that situation where I played at a high level game like that. So I'm willing to buy that it affected him some, but I think that the issues that are cropping up in terms of decision making and on defense, you got to put your hands up, right? I understand if your mobility is a little bit limited and those kind of things, but or maybe a step slow or something. But there are times he wasn't putting he just doesn't put his hands up to contest shooters. Those are the things that I need to see change. And so my stance hasn't changed really based on this. My stance for the playoffs, he's a really good player. He's tough to he's a really good regular season player with some clear flaws. Gonna be tough to replace, and you likely take a step back if you trade him. But for the right price, I'm definitely open to it. We discussed in the last pod, and I think from a rhetorical standpoint, we say different things about how we value him, but I think we have a pretty close idea of what we'd want back. For me, it's 2 unprotected firsts, and either a really good young player or a good vet on a solid deal, as like kind of the core of the deal. For that kind of a price, I would be willing to move him. But the injury doesn't really change much of that evaluation, and for whatever it's to the extent that I've never questioned his dedication to the Knicks or caring enough to play through an injury. That part was always evident to me, and that is commendable. And I'll root for the guy wherever he goes, as long as it's not Boston or Philly or a place like that or Brooklyn. But in terms of how I value or how I evaluate the playoffs for him, given that his flaws, a lot of them didn't seem like I'll give him maybe a little bit of a pass on defense, but not fully. I think the flaws that we saw, a lot of it remains even if without the context of the injury, and that's why my stance on how I look at him as we move forward with the Knicks hasn't changed much.
Yeah. The injury thing is, I don't really know what to make of it because I knew he was injured. So, okay. Like, I genuinely don't understand why anybody's opinions would change unless you were like,
well, it required
blind
surgery, right? So like,
okay, like it's not some fucking serious. Like, it's clearly not a surgery that is going to. It's not. It's at least from what the reporting is. It's not going to cut into. Not going to cut into his availability once the season kicks back again. Training camp and all that. So presumably he should be ready to go in a month or 2 months, something like that. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on arthroscopic surgery for ankles, but from what I have read, it's also not exactly the most severe surgery to ever exist. And okay, like he needed surgery. Carmelo needed surgery in 2013 after the season was over with his shoulder. I don't remember anybody being like, well, shit, Carmelo needed surgery. I guess, you know what? We can't judge the season he just had. The Pacers series doesn't count anymore. Like, it's not how that works. All these guys are beat up. I wouldn't be surprised if Jimmy Butler needs surgery after the season. I wouldn't be surprised if, if Brunson needs to go into the knife at some point. There, all kinds of guys, shit happens. LeBron probably needs surgery or something. Like, all these dudes deal with shit. And that sucks. But, like, guess what? You're not going to win an NBA championship with being 100% healthy. It's just not realistic. And to Randle's credit, like, he's shown that he's able to play through injuries. Whether in this case, was it wise? Was it the right choice? Would it have been better if he had maybe sat a little bit longer because he would have returned in better health? I have no idea. I think it's possible that, maybe they made a recommendation, but he was cleared to play and he said, fuck it, I'm going to play. So, I look, the part that actually pisses me off about this is I saw people being like, well, if he had sat, you would have killed him. Like, people would have killed him for that too. And it's like, when who is going to kill Julius Randle for missing games? I want to know that because that would be insane.
Well, the New York media is pretty nuts.
Yeah, but like
right?
this is not a guy this is not the Jeremy Lin thing. Okay, this is not like, oh, he doesn't want to play because he doesn't want to risk looking like shit going into a contract. No, he's under contract. This is a guy who has played consistently, literally, like throughout his entire career. He has more or less played every game he possibly can. The only games he's missed in the last 2 years for the Knicks, he missed a game in 2020, 2021, where he had a sore ankle. He missed one game. I think the year before he missed one game because somebody had passed away. I believe. I think it was might have been his grandmother. And I think he missed one game. And then last year he missed like 7 or 8 or 9 games. But that was also, there was like 4 games at the end of the season he missed because the Knicks were just like, all right, dude, like I think we're good here. Like we've seen enough. Yeah, we've seen enough. You've seen enough. Like let's cut. Like we're not making the playoffs. Thanks. Like he's not a guy that misses games unless he absolutely has some very very legitimate reason to. Nobody. Not if he had sat this entire playoffs. Honestly, if he had sat the entire playoffs, I would have just been like, okay, like he must be really hurt. And we all saw the injury he had against Miami that did not look good. It looked pretty bad. And so if he had missed the first 3 games of the Cleveland series, I would have just taken that at face value and moved on because he's earned that much, I think. At the bare minimum, he's definitely earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to being available or not.
Do you think we win the Cleveland series without him?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I didn't think he played that well. I agree with you. Game 1, I know the numbers weren't good. I thought he played well that game.
And I thought he was a big part of them stabilize, especially because Brunson was in foul trouble early in the game, kind of keeping them in it. I thought his defense was good.
Yeah, his defense was good.
Mobley, I thought he was an important part of that series. I don't know that he helped in the Heat series, but yeah,
I know he did not help in the Heat series. And I think,
I mean, do you give any credence to the idea that?
I know exactly where you're going with this.
What am I
that the defense is like scheming for him and that opens up
No, I'm saying that at least pulling Bam out. But we've talked about this, right? Because Bam was helping it. But Brunson went off for 31, 38, and 41. Do you think that happens if Bam is just parking the paint?
I think we should give Julius an assist for every shot that Brunson made.
I mean, I think there is a gray area, right, between he didn't help at all and then there are people who try to make the case that he was the responsible for that. Obviously, they're wrong. But I think I don't think it's beyond the pale to suggest that Bam at least having to worry about someone else a little bit helped Brunson.
I don't like game 1. We saw Brunson without Julius. He didn't play a good game, but his issues weren't like he's not making shots. His issues were his decision making wasn't great, and he was just dribbling.
That's complexified. Not a word. That is complicated by when Bam can just be there at all. It makes the decision making more difficult, right?
Maybe I didn't really think I thought his biggest issue was he was just taking forever to dribble out the clock. It was very, very slow. And he's had instances of that with Julius on the floor. I thought the same thing after game 2 of the Cleveland series. I thought he even said it. It was the same exact thing where he was like, I got to be better. And that was with Julius on the floor. And we saw Brunson kick ass with Julius off the floor at the end of game 4 against Cleveland, the entire second half of game 5 against Cleveland.
And those are obviously great defenders too, right? I mean, Mobley is their best defender. So
yeah, and I just don't. I just don't subscribe to that idea too much. Is there value to that? Sure, yeah, there's some value to it, but it can't all just be like this. Actual value has to come from your play, and that doesn't mean he needs to make a bunch of fucking shots. But I'll put it this way: I could live with anything he did in this playoffs if he had just done your injury is not an excuse for, I'm going to bring, first of all, if you're hurt, right? If he is playing hurt, he's complicating things by himself by, I'm going to get the rebound and then I'm going to go dribble the ball up the floor myself very, very slowly for whatever reason. And then he makes, let me just make a casual pass back to Brunson. Oh, it's a turnover. Throw my hands up. Don't move. Don't try to get back. Don't do anything. That's bullshit. Like that's not about an injury. If he's getting back, but he can't contest a shot, okay, then I might just be like, yeah, maybe that was just the injury. But this is like
I mean,
not
do you buy the
even.
idea that with an injury, that if you're in pain, it literally is sending a nerve signal to your brain, right? So if you've ever even if you drive with like an injured ankle or something, right? Like you're probably, you might miss things or not have the same focus because, I mean, playing through pain is a pretty not interesting experience. It can maybe have that impact, right? Where
But this is all
because
shit that we've
it's
seen from him before. We saw this literally.
that's true.
If
That's
you
what,
go
yeah.
back, I'm not even joking. Go back and watch the game he got injured in against Miami. Go back and watch that. He is doing all of the same shit that we saw in the Miami series before he got injured in that game. All of it, literally all of it. Stupid shot selection, forcing shots up, bringing the ball up stupidly and not maximizing opportunities.
Not swinging the
Stupid,
ball.
stupid decisions in transition, not swinging the ball, not trying on defense, lollygagging back in transition. Like he's doing all of that shit, all of it. And like I think I brought this up. I was talking to Tyrese. We did Strickland roll, but like if you look at so he obviously, and I truly, this, none of my criticism of Julius can change this. He was 100% deserving to me of not just an all-star but the all NBA berth he got. He was great for most of the regular season. Okay, now that said, okay, these are his averages, the last 11 games of the season he played before he got hurt against Miami. Okay, actually, I'll even take out the Miami game because he only played 14 minutes. These are the 10 games preceding that. All right. He put up 25.6 points per game on 20.6 field goal attempts. These are his shooting splits: 41.7 from the field, 27.8 from three. He was averaging only 7.4 rebounds in those 35 minutes. He did have a nice 4.1 assist to 2.6 turnovers. Decent anyway. Not the greatest, but that's a pretty, you take that from your power forward, that assist turnover ratio. But the point is, like, I think he was trending down already. His efficiency was trending down. And this has been a theme for him over the last 3 seasons, where it feels like towards the end of seasons, not just is his output in terms of, his efficiency and all that stuff, does it tend to come down a little bit as the season goes on, but you also start seeing more and more of these, like,
Was Brunson healthy for all 10 of those games?
Brunson missed the Charlotte Sacramento, played some of the Sacramento game. He missed the Charlotte Clippers and Lakers game and the Portland game. But like, I mean, come on, man. Like, we can't just.
Well, I've said my take is that I think that this year's Julius Randle, the resurgence had a lot to do with with Jalen Brunson,
right,
right?
but
Like,
like,
so I think people
agree with
don't.
that.
So I think that, does he look exactly like 2020, 21 Randle? Probably not. He probably looks a little bit better than that, but I think it would have been a lot closer to that than all NBA Julius, or what we got. And so, I mean, I do think that it goes to both ways. That when people argue that he's the best player on the team, he's the guy defense are focused on. That to me is a little bit ridiculous. I think I think it always was Brunson. The other part of it is it should, if you're going to talk about his efficiency, I think you should probably judge it in the context of him being the second option. And I think it's also fair to say that, okay, if he's if he's efficient as a second option next to Brunson, but he's not good when Brunson's hurt and he has to take over. He did have that 57. But no, Brunson played the 57-point game, right? The point is, like, maybe that's worth talking about. Like, a real second option, a reliable second option should be able to perform as the first, even when Brunson's out, right? But I'm just saying, like, on that efficiency in those 10 games, like, Brunson is probably a big part of that, missing Brunson, because we know Randle has his pretty severe limitations when he has to be the go-to guy.
I mean, I just don't agree with that. In the regular season, like, if you can't, Charlotte, terrible team. Sacramento, good team, terrible defense. Clippers, a pretty mediocre team this year, if we're being honest. Lakers, very, very good defensive team. Actually had one of his best games in that stretch against them in a win. Portland, terrible. Like, Minnesota. The thing that's crazy about this stretch, this is the stretch he had the 57-point game.
Wow. So if you
So like that's in this stretch where all of his numbers crater, his average, his shooting efficiencies, his splits crater. Like and again, it's not just the scoring efficiency, it's the outbursts with teammates and the fact that he seems to become increasingly unhinged. It's as if the pressure of the season, and I want to mention this because I talked about this with Jake Fisher when I had him on a few months ago, that, look, it was a very stressful season, not just for Julius, but around the NBA because every game really mattered. Like, how many teams tanked? Like there were teams that were playing for the play-in spot, and the seeding was so tight, so every night mattered. It was very difficult. I think there's a mental strain on that for sure. But like we saw this in 2020, 2021, when towards the end of that season, right, his output fell off, and then obviously he had that disastrous playoffs, which were, I mean, for again, a lot of the stuff we saw this year where it wasn't just, oh, he's not shooting well, his effort started lagging. And
at the end of that regular season, they had like a 9-game winning streak, right?
Yeah, but he wasn't shooting that well. If you go back and look at his numbers were trending down. The three, like his last few games, especially that fucking Celtics game that in the season, he was not good in. And it was like, look, you obviously have to live with bad shooting nights from high usage players, but there's a different, like when it's consistently happening, I think it's an issue. Obviously last year, I mean, he was a mess for a lot of it, but like it wasn't great towards the end of the season. He had that fucking hissy fit with Gobert at the end of a game. He stomped off the floor after we beat the Bulls because I don't know why. Like he had him on, and then this year, as the stretch goes on, he has that freak out against the Clippers. He loses it on quickly against Orlando. Then he has that shit show of a game against Miami right before he gets hurt. Like there are instances of him dealing with shit in shitty ways also during that stretch. And it's like, then we see the playoffs and there's a lot of like throw my hands up, exasperated, point fingers at other guys. Like, I just think there's evidence that it gets to him. And honestly, when he got hurt, I thought maybe a blessing in disguise was just like, get him fucking away from the floor for a bit, really get a chance to just like decompress and reset. And initially when he came out in that Cleveland series, I was like, oh man, this is going to be, it worked. Like he looks much more relaxed. But as that series goes on, right? Game 1, I think he plays a good game. Game 2, nobody played well. Game 3, he's fine in a game where the Knicks just, it was a cakewalk. But he was probably one of their least effective players, at least in the starting lineup. Game 4, he plays a miserable game to the point that Tibbs benches him down the stretch of the game. Game 5, he played really well, then he gets hurt. Okay, fine. Miami series starts. Game 1, he misses that. Game 2, plays one of his, maybe the best playoff game of his career, maybe the best game of his career considering the stakes. And after that, it's Game 3, terrible. Game 4, terrible. Game 5, terrible. Game 6, terrible. And, I'll say this. Game 5, he wasn't totally terrible. His passing was really good, especially in that third quarter. He scored decently from the field. But his defense and effort in that game, his defense and rebounding specifically, were not good. They were not good. And, like, when he's making enough shots and he's making enough good decisions, one of the things that stood on that game is he was making good swing passes along the perimeter. When he does those things, it can go a long way to making up for the fact that he's not competing on defense and not, necessarily hustling on the boards. And, some of that stuff can be explained. Yeah, I'm sure the ankle hurt him defensively. I'm sure the ankle cost him some work on the defensive glass. But like, what my point is we were starting to see this happen in the regular season. Yeah. Like his defensive, like I said, those last 11 games, he's averaging just 6.5 defensive rebounds, 7.2 total. Like that's down from what his season average is. Like well below his season average. The guy averaged 10 rebounds a game, and he averaged specifically 8.1 defensive rebounds. That's a pretty steep drop off. I have a lot of sympathy for. I think how he bounced back this year is very admirable, very commendable. I think he deserves a ton of credit for it. At the same time, I don't think that should absolve what the hell we saw in the playoffs. And I don't think the ankle sprain totally explains that away. And um, again, like at the end of the day, he was on the floor. If he didn't feel right and if he couldn't play, then he shouldn't have played. But he was cleared to play. He clearly wanted to play. He said multiple times on the record in the playoffs that the injury it didn't affect him. It wasn't affecting him. And he could have easily just been like, yeah, it is what it is. I have to deal with it. But that's not what he said. He said, it's not affecting me. And look, there are sequences you could like. I heard you on Lockdown Knicks last week. You mentioned it. There were sequences in the playoffs where you're like, he looks fucking explosive. He's like dunking on Jared Allen. He's doing shit. Like, I don't buy it. I'm sorry. Like, if it affected him, and I'm sure it affected him. By the way, not to say if, but if the level to which it affected him does not explain away the performance we saw, and I think people using that as like, oh, well, see, that's bullshit. Honestly, you're just a gullible fool if that's like your takeaway. Like, oh no, nothing is bad now because he was hurt. Like all these fucking guys are hurt, man. Jimmy Butler, like for example, if Miami loses the series and Jimmy Butler continues to struggle shooting from the field, aside from like the weird band of social media people that want to like just marry Jimmy Butler, he's gonna get shit on. He'll get shit on for it. That's just the reality of how it works. Like, yeah, I'm sure he's hurt. So is everybody.
Miami fans keep posting that stupid Josh Hart clip to be like,
yeah,
we would have won the championship if not for Josh Hart. Which
but it's amazing though because when he struggles, when he struggles, it's Josh Hart fucked him up. When he plays well though, it's oh my god, Jimmy's the best, Jimmy Jordan. But no, look, the Randle stuff is just annoying to me because it's like we're and I'll go back to this. You talked about you want very, 2 unprotected picks, young player, whatever it was, right? That specific package. And I get that. And I think the Knicks need to, they need to make a good deal for Randle, a useful deal for Randle if they are to trade him. But I think it's worth noting, like, if you bet on Julius to turn things around this season, and that's why you didn't trade him last year, I again, like, if you're only going to trade him for a haul, I think that's a mistake because he is volatile.
So would you consider 2 unprotected firsts and a young player a haul, quote unquote?
I would consider that
fair value?
Pretty good value. Pretty good value. Like, I don't know. I'm not. I think
that is not like some Danny Ainge. We're not going to trade him unless we get that, right?
No. I'm not saying you are, right? But there are people that are like, any trade you suggest, it's just like, oh well, we're going to be worse, and what is that going to get you? And it's like, look, I don't have all the fucking answers for you, but like if you're trading Julius, there's 2 parts of this. If you're trading Julius, like I don't forgot who posted this the other day. Somebody, or maybe it was on our Discord. Somebody was like, "Oh, would you trade Julius for like basically the 4th pick in the draft, right? Because Houston has that, or the 3rd pick, which Portland has, whatever it is, either of those teams, right? If we just trade Julius for that pick, and there was like a bunch of people that were talking about, oh well, if we do that, we're a worse team. We're going to be a worse team next year, and it's like, well, yeah, but if you're making that trade, presumably you're making it for a couple of reasons. One is that you love whoever it is that you're going to pick at 3 or 4, and you believe that player, that person, is going to be key to your ultimate eventual contending Knicks roster, right? So, yeah, this next season, you're going to be worse off, but in time, you believe that player that you're trading Julius out for is going to not necessarily replace his production, but be a key component to your contending Knicks team. The second part is this. If you're making that trade, presumably, again, you are doing it because you believe that as good as Julius is, there are things that he fundamental shortcomings in his game that will prevent you from being a contender with him on your roster. Those are the two keys to trades like this. So like it's not so much to me, and so your trade is obviously the one you're describing is different, right? Because it's more like it's unknown value in a way, right? Like you don't know what two unprotected picks in, let's say 2025 and 2027, you have no idea what those are going to be, right? We don't know. And let's say the young player is like a good
Keldon Johnson.
player, yeah, like a good player, but not an all-star. Somebody who's solid, but is probably never going to hit the heights that Julius has. So yeah, you might be worse in the short term, but like there's also value to that, right? There's value to changing the context of how your team operates, how the positions you're putting players in. That is not it's hard to quantify. Like I can't tell you the specific value of like what is the value of taking out Julius's usage, but playing a four who is more of an off-ball threat that can open up the floor. How does that benefit Jalen Brunson? What does getting more touches do? What does the removal of Julius Randle's usage and spreading that out among guys like RJ, Quickly, Grimes, like what does that do for them, and how does that impact the team? Like I can't quantify that stuff. Those are risky propositions, but like there's potential for that to still work out well. And I think there are trades that could be made where your current ceiling of the team might not be as good as it is with Julius, but that might not hurt you that much in the regular season. Um, I it's again, these are everything you do, everything the Knicks can or will do carries risk. Like the idea that there's somehow no risk, like
Well, I
it's a
mean, in 2
risk if
years, you
we
might have
if
to pay Randall $50
yeah,
million, right?
well, and forgetting even that, right? There's of course there's risk in trading Julius, but like we should probably stop pretending that there's not risk and an opportunity cost that comes with keeping him. Like if you keep him, that's what is he? What was he like 28 usage or something this year?
Yeah.
Right? That he's going to be at 28, 29, something 27 to 29 usage. He's going to be there if he's on the roster. That's not me.
So even if you get a guy like Jaylen Brown or you get another star player, because I
Yeah,
think his usage did go down from last year when they added Brunson, right?
yeah, but I think he still led the team in usage. Like he was
Yeah,
still
but he's a play
definitely the
finisher, right? No, his usage. No, you're actually I was wrong. His usage went up, so he was at
yeah.
29.5 usage this year. He was
Yeah,
actually
and
28
I
this year.
agree that like there was more play finishing and less Julius has to create
Initiation.
right now. But like there's still plenty of initiation. I mean, the guy's the number one option on the team. And
I would still say Brunson is. I guess
I
that's
think Brunson should be, but I think in the regular season it was definitely Julius. And sure, down the stretch of games, I think like while there are certain moments where you're indulging Julius, it was obvious that like Brunson had you know, the gravitas at the end of games to take the ball and do whatever the fuck he wanted with it. But like I don't see a world, right? We can talk about this. Like, I just listened to the KFS pod this morning where Jeremy did like this 50 fucking 50 like step maneuver to get Zach LaVine and explain why. And okay, whatever. Let's say they do if effectively swap out RJ for Zach LaVine. Let's just say that, right? Do you think it's safe to say, just asking, like genuinely asking, you think it's safe to say that despite, the fact that LaVine logged a bunch of minutes for a top 10 defense this year, is it safe to say that Zach LaVine is not a good defender?
that is my opinion. Yeah, I do think
Okay.
he's a little bit underrated on that end, but yeah,
Yeah.
like I don't think he's a sieve. He's probably like is he like that much worse than a guy like Jamal Murray who's getting some accolades for his defense? Probably around the same level, I think.
I feel like, I feel like Murray might be a little stouter, but yeah, I agree. Like they're fine. They're fine on defense. But they're not good on defense. So he's not a good defender. We also believe that Julius Randle is not a good defender, even though he can be, correct?
Yeah,
And we believe that Jalen Brunson is a bad defender.
yeah.
Okay. So if we live in this, so if like these guys, right, the reason why they're still considered, however good you consider them, they're broadly considered good players to different levels, correct?
Yeah.
Because why? Because their offensive utility is, what you get out of them offensively outweighs whatever issues they cause for you on defense. So we're in agreement on all of this.
Yeah.
So if I now bring Levine in, somebody is going to sacrifice offensively, which is fine. That's the natural, we talked about this last time. We talked like Chris Bosh had to do that, right? Like it's a natural thing you have to do. But somebody that's fine as long as you can get defensive utility out of it. Like this is why the KG thing worked for the Celtics, right? Because KG was like, okay, I'll be like, I don't mind. I'll be the second or third option, and I'll be the best defensive player in the league. Yeah, like I'll be the best defensive player in the league. You wouldn't have that with those three. Like none of those guys, even if they try harder on defense, they are never going to be
like Randle. I think
defenders.
could be sub. Yeah, well, I think he couldn't be
Randle
a sub elite defender.
I think Randle,
but
could be
you're buying a lot of that he hasn't shown. Yeah, maybe elite. You're buying a lot that he hasn't shown yet. But it's interesting to think about. But yeah,
it's just like very hard for me. And this isn't just Randle, by the way. I think it's very hard to take players that are wired like, especially at this age, right? Like, when you're there, these are those three, like, but specifically in this case, Randle and Levine, I think are worth talking about. Like, they're both established pros. They're 27, 28 years old. They've been in the league for a long time. It's very hard to take those guys and be like, look, not only do I need you we're going to cut your usage down a little bit, but I also need you to now like super commit on defense and play really hard. And like, we need you to not just be a guy on defense. We need you to actually be like, add value, like add defensive value. I think that's really hard.
I mean, Wiggins did it kind of, right?
Wiggins did it. Wiggins is still younger though. Wiggins is like what, 25? Yeah. And I think his situation, like, if you told me, I mean, that's actually a good point. And I think we've talked about this. We talked about this last year with regard to Julius. If you told me like if the Clippers traded for Julius Randle, right? I actually buy that he might be inclined to like accept being more of a third banana and try harder on defense because Kawhi and Paul George are just clearly better players than him. Like they clearly are when they're healthy, which who knows if that will ever happen again. But like when they're healthy, I think he would buy into that. Like if he got traded to the Lakers, I think he would buy into being like, okay, I have to be the third option after LeBron and AD, right? Like, I think he would buy into that stuff with certain groups. But when you're talking about like even with Brunson, people are like, oh, well, he took a backseat to Brunson. Did he really take a backseat to Brunson? Like, really? Like, did he really take a backseat to Brunson? Or was it exactly what we kind of, or what a lot of people, I don't want to take credit for it because I was skeptical of it to begin with. Was it exactly what people said where it was like, hey, look, just get the guy a good point guard and you'll see that he benefits from it. I think it's just that simple. I still think he was the number one guy. I still think he was like the dude, right or wrong, that most everything was built around. And Brunson is just such a fucking spectacular offensive player that it kind of doesn't matter what context you put him in. He can just like make it. I'll play with Jericho Sims and fucking Isaiah Hartenstein at the 4 and 5, no problem. Like he can just make anything work. I don't know. The Julius part of it all is just very, very interesting, and honestly, it is very interesting because I'm just not sure how you like. On its face, getting Levine in for RJ, forget the long-term implications, whether you believe in RJ or not believe in RJ. I think there's like really an interesting discussion to be had there, but it's 100% tied into like Julius and how they all adapt. I think it's a really interesting thing to think about.
Sorry, I was on mute. I mean, first of all, yeah, like, and I posted that I think that both the Nuggets would get worse, or the Nuggets would get better if they had Brunson. The Knicks would get worse. And some of the arguments, people are like, well, Brunson, can he play off ball? Can he be the catch and shoot guy that Murray? You know what Brunson shot on catch and shoot this year, by the way? Any guesses? From three.
Just from three, you're talking about, obviously?
Catch and shoot threes. He took 1.9 a game, which isn't heavy volume, but it's not insignificant at all.
43.8%.
He shot 48% or 47.6% on catch and shoot threes.
What a bum.
That is insane. That is right up there with elite off-ball guys. So the idea that
Are
Brunson
we
didn't,
are we sure that we should put much stock in that though? Because he didn't shoot that well from three in the playoffs, and that sample is
well, yeah. So he's he's a better catch and shoot guy, by the way, right now from three than he is a pull up. Like the pull up three improved this year, but that is still what. If there's anything that dragged down his efficiency, certainly in the playoffs, but definitely in the regular season as well, it is the fact that the pull up 3-point shooting is still coming along. He's still extending his range. I
where did
think
he
part of
shoot
that is
from on pull-ups?
I mean, in the regular season, it was probably like 37% or something.
That's really good though for pull-ups.
Yeah. But he's still not he's not at the level like that's an advantage for a guy like Murray over him, right? Like it's still something that Brunson is improving at, and it is probably still the least efficient part of his game. Or I mean, it's less efficient certainly than catch and shoots, and when he attacks, even with some of the mid range shots that he takes that are tough, he's still, he's still, oh God, I'm just pulling up his stats. He's still pretty effective in that part of his game. Um, but Brunson shot so he shot 33% from three on pull-ups, right? So that's still solid. But he's capable, I think, of much more. And like stars in that mold do tend to get to upper 30s, right? Like a guy like Dame or Murray. Murray shot 37.5 on pull-ups, just as an idea. But the point is, like the argument for that then is that like he wouldn't struggle if he moved. I mean, if he went next to Jokic, I think that would be a god level offense. And I was thinking about this because I was like, why don't we use Randle and Brunson and pick and roll or handoffs? And I'll throw this back to you. Do you think that is an underexplored option for the Knicks, or do you think that because of Julius's issues with decision making and not in those kind of things, it's an option they can't go to? And are there better options to kind of even like? There's probably things we can unlock even more with Brunson. Do you think that's just something we haven't explored enough with Julius, or B, something that Julius doesn't allow you to do?
I don't think Julius is. He's
I mean,
not
I'm not saying
bad.
he's Jokic, but I'm saying that
Yeah. No,
handoffs,
I
pick and
get what you're
rolls,
saying. Like he can do some of it, and I do think they use him in some of it. But like you also see, I don't even know how to phrase this. It's like a very kind of nuanced thing, but there's an art to like doing the dribble handoff, getting the ball to the guy while screening his man without getting called for a foul or turning the ball over.
it's called
And
being named and Bam Adebayo and
or just
not
being
kidding.
named Bam. Right, but like Julius is so fucking demonstrative with everything he does that I feel like it draws attention to when he does commit those moving screens or whatever in a way that like, look, we can sit here and bitch about Bam, and I certainly will because he's a fucking loser. But like, he's very, very
Subtle.
good at hiding that stuff. Like Al Horford is very good at that also. KG used to be the fucking master of that shit. Like there are guys that are just very, very good at that. I don't think Julius is very, very good at that. And that's okay. Like look at the guys we just named. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of dudes that are big men that are fucking tremendous dribble handoff players, which is why getting those dudes is so valuable, right? It's why getting a guy like Sabonis helped open up so many different actions for the Kings because because like he's just so good at that. And Randle is not. It's fine. He's better than most bigs, to be honest, probably at it, but there are limitations to it. So I actually think that's something that like I don't know how much you can explore more of it.
Because
Maybe I'm
putting
wrong.
Brunson next to a guy like that, because he is a really good off ball mover, he can attack downhill. I think when he gets his feet set, he's an elite shooter. I do wonder if there's, and I do wonder, we've talked about this. Can Brunson be your number one offensive option? Should the Knicks be building around Brunson? Different phrases about it. I definitely think there's probably even more they can do with him. And the guys they should be looking at, whether that's a replacement for Randle or RJ or whoever, or it's just someone they add. Those are the kinds of guys who can unlock even more. Who can maybe if he took only 1.9 catch and shoot threes and he shot that good, maybe the question is, well, can we get him even more if he doesn't have to initiate all the time? And we have another guy. What if he's putting those up 3, 4, 5 a game? Maybe his efficiency goes down to only 40%. But you take that. So I think that's kind of something to explore as well, is just what more can we do with Brunson, because as great as an isolation player as he is, and ultimately you're not going to ever have him just be an off ball guy. But like, the small guards that have had success in the playoffs, the one that comes to mind is an elite on ball player. He's also really good off ball. Now, I'm not saying Brunson can ever reach the level of impact of a Steph Curry, but with his strengths, I think you want to use him both on and off ball, and probably allow him to take advantage of some of those things that the Knicks don't, and in some ways never will, because that's just kind of the offense they run. But there's probably some untapped potential there, because we know he's going to continue to improve the pull-up threes. Like, this was his first year taking them at volume. 33% is decent results for that. We know he's going to continue to isolate a lot. We know he's, when he gets catch and shoots, is pretty elite. But what else can we do with him? And who are guys that can unlock some of those things? The way a guy like Sabonis can unlock Fox, right? The way a guy like Draymond can unlock
Trade for Draymond.
unlock Steph a little bit, right?
I'm not joking. I've had way too many uncomfortable thoughts about, like, what if we traded Randle for Draymond, which I genuinely I've
had a lot of uncomfortable thoughts by your mother too. So
well, that's good for you. But I don't know. That would be so weird. I'm not exactly sure how
Can
that
you
would
think of a worse
work.
coach for Draymond on offense than Tom Thibodeau?
I don't know if Draymond. I feel like Draymond would just do Draymond things though. Like, he's just going to go get the ball and sprint and dribble handoffs, and like he's just going to do that shit. And sure, the Tibbs element of it is its own component, but I am actually really fascinated by that idea, because obviously Draymond has some real glaring holes in his game offensively. Defensively, I think he's still super fucking impactful. And it's like, man, Draymond with Mitch. Look, it's going to be ugly with RJ at the 2 and Draymond at the 4 and Mitch at the 5. I'm not saying it's going to be pretty, but
Hard at the 3 too. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many variables on either side of the ball that I genuinely don't know how that would go. Like, I think it could be terrible, it could be great, it could just be neutral in a different way. Like, it's just a very interesting thing to think about. Obviously, Golden State wouldn't do that. The Knicks, I don't think, would do that. But it is something I've thought about. Like, what if they just pulled the trigger on a move like this? Like, that would be interesting.
Are there wings that you think can accentuate Brunson in some of those ways, or allow them? Those are probably more connective types. Like, I know we don't want to talk about Halliburton, but that kind of player, or like, I would actually love Lonzo next to Brunson. I think he'd be great on this team, but obviously injuries are debilitating. But are there guys in that mold, or maybe a different mold, on the wing, who you think can unlock even more from Brunson? Not necessarily the Knicks now have another star to take pressure off him, but actually accentuate in his game.
Yeah, my boy Kobe Brown in the draft. Or Kobe Jones, sorry. There's 2, right? Kobe Brown's the older one.
Yeah,
right?
I say Colby Jones would spell different. Yeah, Kobe Brown they're both upperclassmen, but Colby Jones is a junior.
Yeah, Colby Jones, I like his game. Good passer. But I think you just I mean, this is the Levine idea is so weird, but like, I do think Levine is potentially somebody like that. He's not the greatest passer in the world, but he's a decent passer. He obviously has gravity of his own. I think the fact that he is such a dynamic off-ball threat in terms of his total scoring package makes him versatile, and I think he can make plays that can benefit Brunson. He's also going to do stupid things. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, Zach LaVine is very much in the Jaylen Brown school of, tremendous talent, has moments where you think this is a total superstar. Then the impact metrics don't generally universally love him, because there's parts of his game that are not so great. His decision making is left wanting. Obviously, the defensive stuff, which we've talked about. The numbers will be what they are. Something is off. Like, I just don't trust the numbers entirely with him from what I've seen of him. But I mean, we're talking about guys like that, right? Guys that can effectively do the type of things that Brunson can do, where they toggle on and off ball.
They have one on the roster, by the way, who generally plays really well with Brunson.
Yeah. I mean, quickly, he's obviously been great with Brunson. I think, Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, in general, I think it's always valuable to just have perimeter players that are comfortable and effective in both capacities. Which I mean, look, it's very easy to say. I mean, if you want somebody who I think actually could benefit him, but the Knicks won't ever sign him, and they probably don't have the mechanism to do it this offseason anyway, is somebody like Gabe Vincent. Like Gabe Vincent is a very interesting player. The honestly, if you're talking about like you can pick some dude in the league. It doesn't forget the cap ramifications of it. Austin Reeves is probably. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
that's
somebody
who
that
I
I think
actually
would
think
be.
you're gonna say. I thought you were gonna say him instead of Vincent. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Reeves would be awesome with him. Michael Porter Jr. just such a great playmaker. No, not that guy's Michael Porter Jr. is a hilarious basketball player. Honestly, like if a guy that I think could really help and will be available in free agency this offseason, and who personally I would not mind the Knicks signing would be like Bruce Brown.
Yeah.
I really like Bruce Brown. I think the shooting isn't great. It's been better. It's been a lot better the last couple of years. But what I really like about him is he's just he's such a good transition player and he plays at pace. And I think Brunson at times when he brings the ball up, he's like he can be very methodical and slow about it. But I think he can play well off of somebody else who takes that load off of him. And I think that's part of why him and Quickly have played well together is that there is more of like the ability for Brunson to operate off the ball where he's not the focus of the defense. And obviously Quickly benefits from that too in the opposite direction where there are times where Brunson's on the ball and Quickly is not the focus of the defense. So like I really like Bruce Brown. I think he'd be an interesting player for them to add and actually is available this offseason.
And the playmaking or the on ball stuff is because like the question would be, well, if you're talking about an intelligent passer who can kind of play bigger than he was a really good screen setter and kind of a short roll guy on the Nets. Well, the Knicks acquired someone like that and are going to pay him a lot of money. So, do you think there would be any redundancies between Bruce Brown and Josh Hart?
No, because I think Bruce Brown has shown that he's a much more willing shooter. And I also think he's just a better scorer than Josh Hart. Like he's actually, I think his floater is really good. I don't know the numbers on it, but just anecdotally from what I've seen, it feels like his floater is very, very effective for him. I think he's a pretty good dribble drive threat at this point. Not like I'm not saying he's fucking prime
Shea
Derrick Rose or
Alexander.
something. Yeah, but like he's pretty effective as a driver. I just think he's a well-rounded player now, and I know that he's smaller, but I think he plays bigger than his size, which is something we know the Knicks. I don't know if they target that, but they've definitely found players like that, right? Like Quentin Grimes plays bigger than his size, quickly plays bigger than his size. Deuce defensively anyway plays bigger than his size. Like they have guys like that. Josh Hart, guy they traded for, he plays way bigger than his size. Pause. But like there's they have those they have guys like that, and I do think Bruce Brown would fit into that. And I also think, man, like I know the spacing would be a little bit messy, but man, having him quick and hard off the bench would be so fucking fun. Like they'd be really really fun. Um, I'm very very into the idea of the Knicks using like the MLE on Bruce Brown. He'd be high up on my list of candidates for that if they're not going to
And,
go with the stretch four.
and Denver, and I mean, he's played. Yeah, he plays bigger than. I don't think he's ever played the four much. Did he play it at all formally in Brooklyn, or I know they
No, I don't
used him
think
a
so.
lot as a screener, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean so I think that's really what you're getting at, right? Is like who are the like are there guys that can be used in versatile ways alongside Brunson that can unlock these different opportunities for him, right? Like so it's not just like, oh, we want to have Brunson play off ball, but it's like, okay, do we have a guy that can run dribble handoffs, right? So which is kind of an off ball action, but it's also kind of an on ball action. And we know the Knicks like to use those because they go into those dribble pitches all the time, but they don't have a great handoff player. I think Obi's probably the best one at it, and I think some of his shit is telegraphed. I think you can disguise it a bit
Hardenstein's
more.
pretty
Yeah,
solid at it, and he
but
because he
you
has
can't like,
those.
yeah, but you can't like if he runs a dribble handoff at the top of the key, like he's not like a
He's not
super.
keeping it.
Yeah, and I mean, and he has done it a couple times, and he gets to the rim, but it's like not a high volume play for him, and it's not one the defenses have to respect a ton of. Bruce Brown, I think, like opens up a lot of different possibilities. So yeah, I'm pretty into that idea, and I think he's the type of player that you were kind of describing, even if it wasn't describing him specifically.
Do you think the Knicks could get him for the MLE?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he's going to get an MLE offer from somebody, and I do think the Knicks could be that team if they offered it. Obviously, yeah, I think for sure he's available for that.
And obviously
Because
defends in a way that Tibbs obviously likes, right? Both from a metric standpoint, and if you watch, he's a pretty solid defender. So
yeah, he's interesting type for me. But like, um, I'm actually curious about this. I was talking about this yesterday in our Discord. Which is like totally not Knicks related. Maybe could be but if the Knicks or not the Knicks, if the Hornets have the second pick, they could draft Scoot Henderson, who I believe he is your number 2 prospect.
yes.
Um,
There's questions about the fit with LaMelo, and they seem to be really into Brandon Miller. But yeah,
yeah, like if let's say they
I
do
don't have
have
questions about the fit with LaMelo, by the way. But this is what a lot of people say. So
yeah, like let's say they do have concerns about the fit with him. Would you so they're okay, but let's say they have fit concerns with LaMelo and Scoot, and they have decided that Scoot is like we just think this kid is going to be a superstar, which I don't think is far fetched. A lot of people believe this, right? So let's say they believe that, like as good as LaMelo is, we just have a higher eval on Scoot. What do you think they could get for LaMelo? Because I genuinely have no idea. Like he's super talented. He is one of the best transition passers for sure in the league. I mean, even some of his half court passing is great. The shooting is it can be reckless, but the volume and the percentages he hits, I think, are very, very promising.
he has the makings of an elite shooter at a pretty young age. So
Yeah. His defense is, let's say, leaves something to be desired. I have a lot of questions about him as a half court organizer of
leader.
offense. Yeah, even just as a top scoring option, I think there are real concerns with some of his lack of physicality when he drives. We've talked about this with Quickly, right? Quickly was over reliant on his floater when he came to the league. That's something that he's worked on, and I think like he's really made tremendous progress there. LaMelo, for a guy his size, I think is way too reliant on
And
finesse shots,
he
touch
shoots
shots.
this season. It was 36 games, but he only shot 32% from 3 to 10 feet. He's 38% for his career, so that's going to have to improve no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I tend to think that like he's going to improve in those areas, but if we're going to be completely honest, right, like RJ Barrett's faced a lot of criticism for his kind of touch in that short mid-range area. LaMelo's numbers aren't great. Like they're pretty much the same, right, to what RJ's were. So
yeah, I mean it's a higher volume. It's like
yeah.
it is like he uses it more. It's like RJ doesn't go to those floaters that much. I think that's part of. And it's worth noting RJ improved to 38% this season, which is higher.
Yeah.
So,
but like he's a very weird player, and I don't know exactly how he'd be valued. So I'm curious because you are a draft person. Let's say like Orlando calls you up and they're like, all right, we will give you our 6th pick and our 11th pick. That's our starting point for like what we're willing to offer you for LaMelo Ball. What more would you want to actually make a trade?
I don't think LaMelo is going to be available.
Right. This is just a hypothetical scenario where the Hornets are, and I'll lay out why I think it's possible they would look to move him. He's going to want a max contract extension this summer. There's no question about that. Have you seen enough from him? Given he only played 36 games last year, whatever the hell he played. Yeah. Are you willing to just make that commitment right now if you're them, considering that you were the worst team in basketball last year? Like you're very far off from being competitive. So,
yeah, I would make that commitment. He's 22 now, I think, or he was 21
right.
This season.
No, for sure. And I'm just saying, I think
very young,
I think there's an argument for our timeline. We've maybe already fucked up our timeline with LaMelo. if we can cash in on him right now, because this is one of the periods of a young player's career where they're potentially at peak value, right? Like where it's easy to trade him because he's not signed the extension yet. The team acquiring him will be getting his RFA rights. Presumably, we'll be able to max him, whatever, right? So there's value. Like this is a stage in his career where he'd be at high value. And let's say you're like, I think we've already kind of blown 3 years of this kid's contract. If we max him and he wants a player option, we're on the clock already in 2-3 years. Why don't we cash in on this guy and let's really make an effort to not repeat these mistakes with a guard prospect that we believe will be elite one day also in Scoot Henderson. I think there's like a legitimate argument to make there. I personally, I'm going to say this. Like I would seriously, I think if there's a trade to be made for LaMelo that is returning good value, I think the Hornets should do it. So
Yes.
like,
So
I'm
for
more
one
curious
Orlando
to find
trade-
out what, like, I just don't know what his value is. So
so
like,
two
always fascinated
unprotected
about this.
picks plus another protected pick is what got you DeJounte Murray, right?
Yes,
And then
and a salary filler, but yeah.
Yeah, that he's not. I would want a lot more than that. If Orlando is calling me with 6 and 11, I'm asking for Franz. For LaMelo, I know you're extremely high on Franz. I'm extremely high on Franz. If I'm trading a guy of LaMelo's caliber at age 21 or age 22, regardless of what he's getting paid, I want that kind of a player back. And I'm not sure there's a player like that at the 6th pick in this draft. I personally don't think I think LaMelo would go higher than 6th. So I would ask for Franz. I would imagine Orlando would say no. And if that's the case, then I would ask for probably at least 2 more picks. At least 1 more unprotected. I'd probably ask for 2 more unprotected picks. If it had to be 1 unprotected and 1 like jump protection at the 4, fine. And then looking at the rest of the roster, like if you're going to draft Scoot, a guy like Cole Anthony doesn't make a ton of sense. He's going to get paid soon too. What
about Gary Harris?
That he's more of a win now player, right?
He is, but I do think you want to put a guy like Scoot.
I mean, Gary Harris isn't is he a great shooter?
I think he shot well again last year. He's been really weird. He's had a very odd career because I thought there was a point where he looked like, he shot 43% from 3 last year.
Yeah, but 4.5 attempts a game, that's decent volume.
38.4% the year before, 43.1 last year. Just that his career is so fucking weird.
So he's not like a guy who I'm like, yes, I'm giving Scoot a big time shooter. He's a solid player. He's also 28. And if you're resetting, you're probably going to be a year or 2 away from seriously competing. Do they have interest maybe in getting off of Hayward's contract? I don't think you use LaMelo to do that. But I think that barring Orlando being willing to deal Franz, I would want 4 unprotected first, or at minimum 3 unprotected first, and like a top 4 protected first. And if you want to throw, because first of all, Orlando's going to be good going forward, especially if they get LaMelo. If you want to throw in, Harris just to make the salary match, I think he's a good fit. But that would be kind of my starting point. Would be either it'd probably be something like either 3 unprotected first and a good young player. If you give me 2 unprotected first, I would want a Franz caliber player. And if you're just going to only do filler, I'd want 4 first that have a reasonably chance of conveying at an extremely high pick.
So, if you were the Knicks, what would you offer for LaMelo if he was available this offseason?
I love the fit with Brunson, which is actually like the fit of him with Scoot. I think if you're not reliant on him giving you a ton of Scoot is going to bring that rim pressure that we just talked about as kind of the hole in LaMelo's game right now, right? I don't think moving LaMelo off ball will. I think it can unlock even more. It'll probably drive down his turnovers. It'll allow him to be even more impactful as a shooter, and it'll still take advantage of his playmaking, and it'll help a young guy like Scoot. I also think a lot of the stuff we just talked about with Brunson comes more on the table. Imagine pairing Jalen Brunson with an elite. He played with an elite passer, right? And if you convince LaMelo Ball, he doesn't have to play like Luka Doncic. You can see even more of what made Brunson such a great off-ball player. What would I be? I would be willing to trade a lot. I would probably be willing to trade. I don't know what the if you say 3 unprotected equals a first, I'd trade 3 unprotected, maybe 2 of our future unprotected picks. I mean, do you think they would? All due respect, do you think they would demand quickly in that? Do you think they'd demand a guy like Grimes in that? I mean,
probably Grimes more so than quickly, right? Like, not saying that
Quickly's
I
gonna have to
think.
get paid too. So
Yeah,
Quickly's the same
Quickly's gonna
draft
have to.
class as
Yeah,
Lamelo.
Quickly's
So.
gonna have to get paid, but also more than that. Like, while we know Quickly can play well off of a guy like Scoot or any real ball handling guard, you could look at it right and be like, okay, Scoot's what 6'2".
Yeah.
And I know he looks like fucking the Incredible Hulk, but like he's 6'2". There's limitations to that. Do you really want to pair? Isn't like part of the reason you're trading LaMelo in this hypothetical scenario probably has to do with some like defensive concerns. Um, there would be concerns with putting him next to Quickly. It would, if you and with Grimes, like I personally think Quickly is a better play than Grimes, right? But I think that's a valid debate to have. Who's more valuable? Who's better? Whatever. So if you view them, let's just say you view them more or less as similar caliber players, then you would probably want Grimes, right? Because he has the extra year on the rookie contract on top of that.
I
And
think
he's
giving
more
a
of like a
second.
clean off ball. Like he's a very clean plug and play. You don't need to think about how he would play off of Scoot. It's very, very obvious. So I think there's value to be had there.
But I think that Charlotte has in the past liked to have multiple ball handlers,
Well,
especially
they'd
to
still have
pair the young
Rozier.
guard. What?
They'd still have
They would still have
Rozier.
Uzier. So that, but I mean, but my point is like they've had at the times 2-3 ball handlers, right? I think especially early in LaMelo's career, they kind of did that. I would imagine I wouldn't be surprised if they want to have more help for Scoot. But anyway, in any case, no matter how many picks the Knicks give, you would imagine that even if the Knicks give 2 unprotecteds and like 3 protecteds or 3 unprotecteds, maybe they would probably want either Grimes or Quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or not? Or do you think there's a way to keep Grimes and Quickly? And
Well, I still have no idea what the hell his trade value is. Like I really don't. Because he's just such a bizarre, weird player, and his career has been weird, right? It's like the first 2 years they make the plan, they get annihilated in the plan games. Then last year is just like a total. It was a write off. Like it just nothing happened last year. He's a very weird player, but like I think that the Knicks would have to include one of those guys for sure. Like I think
would you do that?
I don't know. I really don't. Again, like look, some of the stuff that we talked about with Levine, as in terms of the defensive stuff being a concern next to Brunson, that is 100%, maybe even more of a concern if you pair Brunson with LaMelo. I don't
That's
think there's
kind of where I disagree because I think as an off-ball defensive playmaker, LaMelo's pretty smart. He's a very smart player. He's skinny. He doesn't have the greatest lateral quickness, but in the same ways that Brunson
I also
is
think
able to.
I think he gambles way too much. And that's actually something. Look, if you want to see high comedy, like Knicks trading for LaMelo and then just having a camera focused on Tibbs every time he does something stupid on defense, that will be like
Or
extreme.
jacks up, even if he jacks
Oh
up
God, like a 30-foot
logo
three or
three.
something. Yeah, like which he does. Yeah, no, like, but he's young. He's what 21. So like, he's not a total. And I agree with you. He's not a total lost cause on defense. I do think he's a bad defender, very bad defender right now. But I don't think there's no chance for him to become an okay defender. But the offensive upside is like tremendous. Because I love Quickly. His offensive ceiling is not what LaMelo's is. It's just not, and that's okay. Most guys in the NBA don't have the potential that this kid does on the offensive end of the floor. And I look. We saw this in the playoffs. The Knicks struggled offensively. I don't think that means that all these guys will like. I don't think it's written in stone that Quickly and Grimes are just going to suck forever in the playoffs or something. Like I don't. But it's something to consider. LaMelo is a more dynamic player than both those guys with the ball in his hands, probably as a shooter also. Um, you can already think about how him and Brunson would play off of each other. It's very tantalizing. I really I have no idea. I will say that if like the way I feel about Levine, where I'm like, man, if we get Levine, I kind of really don't want Julius on this team. If we get LaMelo, Julius cannot be on this team. Like that can't happen. You cannot have Brunson, LaMelo, and Julius. That's just going to be a disaster. Would I do it?
Do you think Charlotte would have interest in Julius as kind of a centerpiece of a trade?
Maybe. I mean, I don't even understand. Like, I don't know if they want to tank or not. They haven't. I know it's funny because they ended up with like what the second pick this year and the third pick the year they picked LaMelo, but they haven't actually intentionally wanted to tank. So maybe like if they wanted Julius, maybe that brings down some of the pick price also because as we talked about, whatever my misgivings about Julius, he is a really good player and he does have value. So maybe that would bring down some of the pick package portion of it. And if that's the case, like, yeah, I probably would do that. I think it's worth the risk. I would then seriously have to consider like, is there a trade where you can move RJ for not just draft capital, but more importantly, like more plug and play traditional 3-and-D wing types because you really need to protect LaMelo and Brunson. And if you're sending out Grimes in the deal, that becomes even more paramount. It's very risky. I think there's potential for it to be terrible in the initial period of the trade, but your reward down the line could be tremendous. It's a massive risk though, and I'm not as high on LaMelo as you or Prez are, but I do think he's like a pretty the
this level of
99
3-point success with this difficulty at such a young age is pretty.
And the passing is really the thing that is really impressive to me more than any of that. Is like, I mean, the shooting is impressive, but the passing is just like he makes passes that like you can rep out. Oh, making one hand whip passes to the corner out of pick and roll. You can rep that out. Like guys can improve that. There are passes he makes you can't rep out. You can't teach that. You can't work on that as part of your game. Like that is just something you're born with or you're not. And I think that is part of his challenge in his development as a player is like it's great that you can make all of these passes. You also have to know when to make those passes and when to try those passes. I think he's too often looking for a home run. You know what I mean? Like you got to know when to take those swings. But the potential, like his 99% percentile outcome is a superstar offensively anyway. And I think it's a superstar that is versatile on and off ball and adds dimensions to your team that like are not replicable. I mean, defensively, he's nowhere close to this guy, but it's a little bit like Jason Kidd, right? Like the way he plays offensively, I think there's a lot of that in him, that open court playmaking, the unselfishness. Obviously, he's way more of a willing shooter than Kidd was. But
never forget that half season where Jason Kidd shot 50% from three.
That was good half season. But yeah, like I mean, there's something there with LaMelo that is. I just find him a very fascinating player because I think if you made a poll on Twitter somehow asking this question, I think you'd get so many different answers about like what he's worth and what should team X give up and should they do that? Would it be worth it? What are the risks? What are the cons? I think he's just like a very, very. He's in a weird place in his career too after the season he just had, so it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, if it's 3 unprotected quickly, even if you have to throw in Randle, I'd probably do it. Or if it's 3 unprotected Grimes, I think if it's 2 unprotected Grimes and Randle, I'd probably do that. I think I would probably the pro Randle part of the fan base would come after me for saying that. It's like if his value is really 2 unprotected.
Yeah, and I think if there are people that say no, I totally get that too. Like I think
the risk also comes from your time. He's going to get an extension, a max extension, and you're tying up a lot of money at that point. Even with Brunson on a good deal, in your backcourt, right? So does that cause roster imbalance and those kind of things? Is the other question there?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do think I keep coming back to Orlando because they they have their whole we have 17 billion Neanderthal wings roaming around on our roster. But they don't have a great ball handler. I know Fultz made real progress last year.
Cole
He's
was
never
actually
going to,
pretty good.
yeah, he was, but he's never going to be the shooter that you ultimately need with that group as a ball handler. I don't think Suggs is ever going to be the dynamic on ball guy to initiate consistently. The defense with him is tremendous, by the way. He's somebody I wonder if you could buy low on in a year or two. He's very interesting.
Fultz?
Suggs.
Suggs, right, yeah.
Yeah. But I just man, if they can get LaMelo and not move Franz or Bunkero, that is a team that would be very fucking interesting for him. And in general, that roster construction would be pretty.
And Franz is the ideal defender to play next to a guy like LaMelo, right? Because he can cover
and
up.
Bunkero for that matter.
Yeah, he's a Swiss Army knife in that sense. I think another question with this roster construction, it applies certainly when you get a guy like LaMelo. How good of a defender is Mitchell Robinson? How if you keep a guy like Quickly, right? How much we've seen the impact measurements. Do you put that to the test and say, yeah, LaMelo's a pretty tough, a bad defender, but you pair him with Quickly and Mitch, a lot of that works out, right? Or if you play Quickly, Brunson, LaMelo, and Mitch together, if you trade Randle, you find a defensive four, or you go with a guy like Hart more in that role. I mean, do you see them maybe, because the way it is that they can put together an elite offense largely because of the brilliance of Jalen Brunson next to Julius Randle, and they can get away with it on defense because they have an elite rim protector, a pretty good defensive coach. But usually when teams do that, they would just add more shooting, right? If they can really rely on Mitch to that level, you don't worry so much about a guy like Hart who can defend. You say, I need more shooters, right? But instead they have two shooters really besides Brunson in the backcourt. They have Grimes and Quickly. The other guys are guys like RJ or Hart, inconsistent shooter. So I guess the question is, do you see them kind of going one way or the other, where they might say, look, we have Brunson and Randle. We need great defenders next to them. Or do you
want it one way, but it's
um,
the other way.
or do you think they see this and they say, Mitch is so impactful. Can we sacrifice a little bit on? I mean, I think that question gets answered with a no when you looked at how they've performed with Evan Fournier. But Mitch really was a much better defender this year. How much can you push that and maybe say we can relax a little bit on some of the defensive requirements for guys we acquire?
I mean, it's a look. The defense wasn't good this year. I mean, it was 19th. I think they ranked in the regular season.
Much better in the playoffs.
Yeah, they were really, really good in the playoffs. Did they benefit from the opponents they played to some extent? Probably.
I mean, Cleveland was still a top 10 defense with two elite.
No, for sure. But I do think that
and Miami's played better against everyone else.
They did. They did. I do the Cleveland matchup to me. There's a reason I wanted that matchup the entire way. Is I just thought their offense. I know was top 10 in the regular season. You always knew that Okoro, that small forward slot, was always going to be a problem, especially with Evan Mobley at the 4. I think that benefited the Knicks. The Heat is a valid thing though, because they've lit up every other team, but the Knicks held them under wraps, and they did it for 6 games. It wasn't like it was a 4-game series. It was a pretty lengthy period of time. So, yeah, I would say that Mitch has the ability, but is he so dominant that you can almost play Utah almost got away with playing 4 minus defenders next to Gobert at his best, right? I don't know if you could do that. I don't think you can do that. Mitch is not that level to me, but he's very, very good. And it's possible, look, he's just turned 25. It's possible Mitch is not done. His understanding defensively has grown year on year. So it's possible there's more to come because there's still stuff that he can get better at. There's still awareness things and decision making on defense that at times he gets in trouble with. I think that he can improve on.
Yeah. I guess it's just fascinating to think about which way they're going to go, but it's really I mean, do you also subscribe to the idea that one of Randle or RJ has to go no matter what?
Uh,
Like, can you see them coexisting
no,
long term?
no, I can't see them coexisting long term. I think there's enough evidence. We've seen them for 4 years together. Like they've never been particularly great on the floor in those minutes. RJ's not a tremendous shooter. Randle is also not a tremendous shooter. He's better for his position than RJ is for his position, but neither is like some lights out knockdown shooter. I think they both ultimately want to get downhill. There's overlap there, and defensively, like we can call it what it is. RJ's defense has not been the way it was trending after his second year. It has not been inspiring the last couple of seasons. The playoffs were better, as was the entire team's obviously, but the playoffs were better. But that's still, we're talking about an 11 game sample size, or yeah, 11 game sample size for RJ. It's not huge, it's not like, oh, well, this changes everything. I do think one of them has to go. I would prefer it be Randle, but I think if it happens in this summer or in the next, sometime during next season, I think it's more likely that it's RJ.
Yeah, and then just looking at just I'm going to pull up the net ratings for the Knicks with Randle and RJ. So in 4 years, and we can definitely narrow this down. There might be some noise, how much but in 4 years, when the two have played together, they have a negative 2.25 rating, 7,100 minutes. So to your point, we've seen a lot of it. The defensive rating is 114.75, which isn't. I've seen worse lineups, but Randle with RJ off, it's a positive net rating, 3.16. The defensive rating goes all the way down to 109. With Barrett on and Randle off, there's still a negative rating, but it's better than when the two of them are together. And the defensive rating also dips, but only to 112.96, which still isn't that great. And with both of them off, the defensive rating is actually pretty good. It's 108.56, and the team net rating is actually better than even with just Randle and RJ off, 3.36. Clearly, on defense, they don't like Randle's. If anything, seems to be a little bit better when he's off, not when RJ isn't on. And the offense doesn't really, like you would think from two pretty strong rim attackers, the offense should benefit, but you don't really see that happen. They seem to be. It's not like they get much worse on offense, but
there's redundancies.
The redundancies, and it doesn't. It should be sum is greater than the parts. If anything, I think the sum is a little bit less. So.
Yeah, I just, a lot of this is like it just if RJ is a better defender, if RJ is a better shooter, then it's a different thing. But like, how much time do you give this is really what it comes down to.
Even if both of them become better shooters, neither one is really a guy you want playing primarily from the perimeter, right? Even if they get better. So
yeah, it's
because you want them attacking the rim. You want both of them attacking the rim.
For sure.
Who do you think has been the better defender, though? Because the on-off would suggest that it's still been Randle over the 4 years that they've been together. Because his rebounding does matter, for example, right? That's one thing. Like he is their rebound guy, and the fact that he's been reasonably reliable, even though he's not consistent at like boxing out, just because of how big he is, that does allow Mitch a little bit more freedom to contest and stuff. Not to say Mitch hasn't obviously been a great rebounder in his own right. So,
yeah, I would say that I guess Randall's been a better defender. I don't even it doesn't feel great. Like I think Randle was definitely a better defender this year, which isn't even I don't think Randle was a good defender this year, but he was better than RJ was this year. In the playoffs, RJ was way better than Randle, and in comparison to his regular season performance. RJ's second season is probably better than
Randle's peak as a defender.
at least from what we've seen in New York. I mean, Randle's peak is awesome as a defender, but when we're talking about peak performance over the course of a year, it's better than what we've gotten over Randle over the course of a year defensively. But you'd still have to say Randle, like the numbers are just too overwhelming to a point where it's like it's really hard to argue for RJ's been a better defender than Randle. So that's just tough.
So in light of that, in light of the fact that Randle is also, I think he'll continue to improve as a shooter. People do. That's one skill that doesn't stop really improving with age. What is it that makes you more willing to trade Randle than RJ? Given that Randle's probably a slightly better defender, although you can argue that. I think wings and fours both have to be really good. So I'm not sure that I would say that. Randle's much. That positional kind of changes that evaluation. Randle's been a better shooter. They're making about the same amount of money. And Randle is probably better at the thing that RJ does best, which is attack the rim. So what is making you why do you lean more towards trading Randle than RJ?
I just don't believe in Randle being I don't think he's going to be on the competitive version of this team, or the contending version of this team, I should say.
But why do you believe that about RJ and not Randle?
I don't. I just, if I had to pick one, I'd prefer to move Randle right now. But I don't think the decision on these guys needs to be attached. So that's where I think this discussion gets kind of it gets moved off course.
Especially on Twitter, usually the hives are pretty diametrically opposed.
Yeah, I don't think this is. Yeah, I don't think this is about Julius or RJ. To me, they're separate decisions. They don't work well together. They don't work well together, but it's arguable that maybe there's just neither is going to be on the contending version of this team. And so, to me, I want to trade Randle for reasons that have actually nothing to do with RJ Barrett. The reasons I want to trade Randle have nothing to do with RJ Barrett. And if I were to trade RJ Barrett, the reason I would want to do it really has nothing to do with Julius Randle. I mean, I think anybody who's listened to this podcast over the years would know that I don't generally tend to weigh Julius Randle's preferences, and unlocking Julius Randle very high on my list of how to go about improving the roster. But if I'm trading RJ, I'm doing it because I think that there's a player coming back, probably a wing, who is at a level that I don't think RJ will hit. And if I'm trading Julius, it's because I just fundamentally do not believe that a player that has shown what he has shown in the playoffs is somebody you want to hitch your wagon to over the long run. So I don't view those decisions as tied together, but I do am I curious about I don't want to trade Randle because I need to see RJ without him on the floor. Am I curious to see RJ play a season without Randle at the 4? Yeah, I am. I am curious about that because I do wonder if there is some element of his what he's capable of is muted by playing alongside a guy like Julius, who likes to operate and deservedly, because he is a better player than RJ is, at least right now. There's a lot of overlap, I think, in where these guys want to operate optimally. So, yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to trade Randle because of anything to do with RJ Barrett, but I am curious to see it. And I suspect that RJ, I'm more confident in RJ retaining trade value than I am in Julius. I'm very apprehensive about the idea that Julius is now this stable asset and there's no risk in keeping him. I think there's very real risk in keeping him.
And the risk would be he reverts back to poor form in the regular season this year, or not even
poor
that?
Form. He has another, he's in a bad mental space for whatever reason. He's, maybe we shouldn't pretend that team success doesn't impact how players are viewed. It's possible the Knicks stagnate, take a step back, however you want to phrase it, And as a result, now Julius is kind of the way he's perceived is lesser than it is today as a result. So I think there's risk in just a lot of ways on trading Julius. And the reason why I don't carry that risk as much with RJ is like RJ's 22. So I think generally speaking, if you have wings that are, even if the underlying impact metrics and advanced numbers don't love them, when you have all around raw production from a wing at that age, that tends to still be a commodity that NBA teams around the league will value to some extent and be after in the trade market if they can get it for what they think is a cheap price. Don't think that's the same thing for Randle.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think that there is less risk with Randle just because with Brunson here, he's gonna be he just has a lot more options, and he's just gonna get less attention from the defense. I also think Brunson's gonna scale up in terms of usage. Um, with RJ, it's a wing who has struggled to shoot the three in all but one season. He tweaked his jump shot with Drew Hanlon. We'll see how much if he improves his jumper though. This is a guy who can get 2 feet in the paint. I will say one thing he does better than Randle. Maybe not consistently this year. I do think he's a better passer and decision maker. You saw that in the playoffs.
Yeah, I trust him. It's weird because I don't trust RJ for about 45 minutes of a game, but I tend to trust him in key moments.
Yeah, and in the playoffs, his decision making was actually really good consistently. Even when he shot poorly, I didn't think there were a ton of really bad shots.
Yeah, aside from the first 2 games against Cleveland weren't great, and then he had the end of the first game against Miami. I thought he was forcing up shots, but I agree. Overall, I thought his decision making was actually good against Miami and in the playoffs in general.
Really good, I thought. And I know this is something Prez has mentioned. How much of that was RJ making a leap in processing? How much of it was the fact that Cleveland was helping so aggressively on drive that the reads became simpler? And I think that he's overstating that a little bit. I think that, before the playoffs, we did a preview pod with Jordan, yeah. And Jordan came on and was, we were talking. I had said that I think RJ, if you're going to put smaller defenders on him like the Cavs will, I think those matchups are good for him. And you had said before the series that he has to make decisions at the rim against Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, and then eventually it became Bam Adebayo. And so I don't think now, in retrospect, I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm not even saying really Prez is doing this. But even in retrospect, I'm not going to say, well, the reads were easier. I think those are still 2 elite defenses.
Yeah, I agree.
With great talent, and he showed out at that level. And if we had that level of decision making from RJ Barrett with just league average catch and shoot, that is a very interesting player. And then you still need him to be a good defender. But I think, to your point, I'm much more willing to bet on those 3 things happening with a guy who's 22 than Julius, where, can he be an elite defender? Yeah. Are you going to bet on him doing that when, and you can't even say that, well, he's been on shitty teams his whole career, right? The Lakers.
Well, it's also, I always hate that argument too, because it's well, is he not responsible for some of that shittiness himself? This is the NBA. This is where one player can have an impact other than quarterbacks in football. That's a player that impacts your baseline more than anything else, right? Like a star in the NBA is worth a lot. That's why you see teams give up so much to get stars. I personally disagree with that, as we've talked about many times, but I still believe, one player can have outsized impact in the NBA. So when obviously team performance isn't totally dictated by an individual, but if you're consistently on teams that,
yeah, I mean, I'm talking specifically on defensive. I think, for example, Wiggins being in places with not much structure that weren't in competitive stuff, probably he might have, if he went to a better winning situation, maybe he would have showed out better on defense, right? Or what we've seen in Golden State would have come around earlier. But at 28, to your point earlier, Randle's been on a competitive team for the last 3 years. Even last year, the year before what just ended, so 2021, 2022, the Knicks were competing for a playoff play-in spot for most of that season. So you had the chance to really impact defense in a way You can argue, but then now if you want to argue, well, he's asked to do too much on offense. Well, this year the Knicks had other guys who could step up, right? You had RJ, you had Brunson, quickly took a step forward on offense. So, like, if you're still not able to give consistent defensive effort, I'm not sure at age 28 that could improve. With RJ, because he's 22, and like, there's people who are going to say that's unfair. Like, just because he's 22 doesn't mean he's going to improve. A lot of what he's shown in the past as well. Like you said, it's not one season of poor defense; it's two. But he's also asked to do some unique things, right? He's often asked to guard the point of attack because Brunson's deficiencies. He's often, he'll play in smaller lineups, or he's sometimes, maybe there's more responsibility to put him in as a rebounder than maybe he should get. But I think the argument to keep RJ, which I get, is that these things, consistent decision making, which I think is the lowest hanging fruit, and I expect the trend to continue from the playoffs in the next season. Just getting the league average from three, we've seen him do it. Yes, it was the pandemic, but he actually also shot better with the fans in the stands. He shot, and then consistent defense, which we saw his second year. This was a trying year, but he's better in the playoffs. I like those seemed lower hanging fruit, especially when you're factoring in his age, than the kind of changes we'd need Julius to make. So yeah, I think I would agree with you based on those things.
Yeah. At some point, I can't wait for actual offseason news to happen, so we can stop talking about trading Julius Randle, because I'm sure that people are sick of us talking about that. But like, this is going to be interesting offseason for them. They've moved beyond the point of just like, they're in a position now where you have to consider all these different components when making any type of transaction, because the Knicks are actually good. It's not just like, oh, well, this guy will improve us because we fucking suck. Like we actually have to consider fit and contracts and how it all works together and shit like that. So this is like a big offseason for them in that sense, because we know that I feel like they've been building to get to this position, and that's a lot of work they've put in, but taking those final steps is the hardest part. And, if you don't believe in Randle, then it's even trickier, because he's such a major component of what they've done so far during their time in New York, Leon Rose and company. So how they negotiate all this will be very interesting. There's two schools of thought where it's like, you can move Randle later, and that shouldn't stop you from doing other things in the meantime. And there's other people that will tell you that everything is pointless until they trade Julius Randle. I think where I fall on that is, I know the former is probably right, but I do at times when we're talking about all this shit, I'm just like, I don't fucking care as long as Julius is here. I know how this is going to play out. Because my belief, and I know that not everybody agrees with this, is just that as long as Julius is here, he is going to be front and center of everything the Knicks do. He's going to be one of the top two offensive options. He's going to take up a lot of the organization's energy. He's going to be a central focus of it. He's going to be a central focus of what they do offensively. And all of that, I just think is like, I'm just over it in that sense. Like, I feel like I needed to see the playoffs this year, and I saw it. And again, as we talked about to start the pod, the ankle stuff is certainly was an issue for him, but I don't think the issues that actually worry me are related to whatever he might have struggled with as the ankle.
You don't see him downshifting to a third option if they get another scorer.
I think it would need to be like a superstar, and like a real, like, I'm not like, if you got like Joel Embiid, I'm not saying that. One, I really would not love that fit between Randle and Embiid in the front court. But if you did get like a Joel Embiid, I think he would understand, like, okay, I'm the third option or whatever. Like, I get that. But if you go get Porzingis, or if you got Levine, or if you got one of these guys who are good
Jaylen
players,
Brown.
Yeah, like good players, but I don't like, if you gave Randle truth serum and we're like, are you better than these guys, he'd be like, yeah, I'm fucking way better than them.
Yeah,
Whereas
he
I
has an
feel like,
argument. He did make All NBA over some of those guys, right? So
yeah, he's got every argument for it. But it's like whether he's right or wrong, it's not really about that. It's more about like elevating the team. Like, what's the best thing for the team, and what's the best thing, and how do you get the most out of whatever the group of players is to start the season? What's the most to get the ultimate ceiling of this team? And like, whether I like it or not, how we deployed the roster last year is probably close to like what their ultimate ceiling is, even if I think Tibbs shit the bed in the playoffs a little bit. But is winning possession ball and feeding Julius and playing this very stagnant, very slow paced game, is that really the strategy that's going to ultimately unlock a contending Knicks team? I'm a little bit skeptical of that.
let me so does the argument that some have made, which is that, well, even with all of this, with Randle not being healthy, not playing well, whatever, the Knicks were, really close to beating Miami. Miami, a lot of things went not their way, and if they beat Miami, it looked like Boston was ripe for the picking. So what do you? And Miami obviously went to the finals, so it's not like we lost to some scrub team. Does that kind of make you a little bit more optimistic in terms of, yeah, like a lot went wrong and they still nearly made it to the ECF and maybe the finals?
I have mixed feelings about it. Like, and I think it makes me optimistic about like what that I don't think we're too far off. I don't think we're too far off from competing. But the mistake you can make sometimes, and this is what the Hawks did, right? Is like, well, we'll just run it back. And all these guys are young and we're just going to get better internally and everything is going to be great. Like, I think that's a mistake because whether you like, no matter what you may believe internally, everybody around you, every team in the NBA, every team, and especially the bracket the Knicks are in right now, all those teams are going to be actively looking to improve their rosters. And like, if you want to point to Miami as like, see, they just ran it back and they lost PJ Tucker and they figured it out, and that, like, yeah, sure, that's an example. But the
They also
majority,
made the play in. Like
yeah,
I don't know if that's a replicable strategy,
right,
right?
and most teams are like actively going to try to add talent. So if you just sit back and you're just like, we believe in our own internal development and that's it, like, I think you're stagnating, and if you stagnate, you're probably going to take a step back because teams around you aren't going to just sit around and let things play out. Like, they're going to be aggressive about trying to find improvements of the roster, which is why, like, whether, regardless of what the Knicks do, whether it's keep Randle and RJ, trade one, trade both, like whatever it is they do, they need, if they want to stay competitive in the East, they have to find ways to improve the roster, which is why I've always talked about, like, even if you keep Randle, you've got to improve that backup four spot, right? Like that's something that you can do that is within your purview. And you should probably take advantage of given the assets you have at your disposal. Like, you have to keep adding
Can you
talent.
find a way to play 5 out, right? We talked about
Yeah.
maximizing Brunson. That guy will be unguardable in a 5 out offense. That,
Yeah.
like,
He is. We already know this. We saw it.
yeah.
But like, yeah, like there are just things they have to do and continue to look for. And like, that's why I think a guy like Noah Clowney, if they did get a late first, he'd be an interesting project to take there because there's a potential that down the line, he is that type of player for you. And so like, these are they can't sit around and wait for it. So I'm optimistic about like where they've positioned themselves at. And I think they have every opportunity to continue on this trajectory they're on, but like, you have to make it happen. You can't just like sit around and, oh, it'll just work out if we wait long enough. No, you have to be proactive. You can't be just, let the chips fall where they may. Like, you have to be proactive about it. And I know that probably sounds contradictory to people that are like, well, you didn't want them to trade for Donovan Mitchell last year because you wanted them to keep these guys. Yeah. And guess what? We kept these guys. We're a really good team now. Like, it's a
But
lot harder to
they
go.
also weren't complacent last offseason. They
Right. They
signed
weren't. Right.
Brunson, they signed Hartenstein, and at the deadline, instead of continuing to be patient and like, let's still keep our draft picks, they made a bold move for Hart, right? So
Right. So like I don't think the Knicks need to make some like massive superstar blockbuster transaction, but they've got to keep making moves to add talent. Like, I mean, I know I've mentioned this on here before, but like, and I know that the Celtics lost in game 7, but the idea behind making a move like getting Malcolm Brogdon, where they effectively turned spare parts and a pick into, a guy that eventually won Sixth Man of the Year on wrongfully. But like a good player, like I think the Knicks can replicate that strategy, right? Like you've got that Fournier expiring contract, you've got all these protected picks and your own picks and everything. Like there's an opportunity there to add more talent to the roster. You should always take those opportunities when they exist, especially in the position where the Knicks are, where they're no longer tanking, rebuilding, but they're actually a good basketball team. When you're a good basketball team, you have to keep adding talent to remain a good basketball team. Otherwise, you run the risk of stagnating and falling back to the pack. So yeah, that's to answer your question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, right? Like you have to ground is constantly moving, so you got to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place.
Yeah.
Before we before we go, I'm gonna name a player. Can you give me a percentage that you think they're on the roster next season, on the Knicks roster?
Sure.
I'm gonna go player by player. Calibrate it, Jalen Brunson.
What am I ranking it by?
No, just give me a percent that he's on the roster next season.
100%.
Mitchell Robinson.
90%.
Miles Turner.
Like 5%.
Julius Randle.
90%.
Oh, okay. RJ Barrett.
50%.
Okay, so you do think an RJ Barrett trade is more likely than a Julius trade. Dante DiVincenzo.
20%.
Bruce Brown.
20%.
Emmanuel Quickly.
85%.
Okay. Grimes.
95%.
Levine.
30%.
Okay. And Joel Embiid.
0%.
Jaylen Brown.
5%.
Okay. And then all right, let's go. What do you think the percentage is? Okay, so I forgot this guy, Obi Toppin.
40%.
Okay, that's higher than nothing. And what do you think the percentage, just to close it out, what do you think the percentage is that the Knicks would trade into the first round? Or
I'll say 65%.
okay. Yeah, so that makes sense, I guess, because if they trade in the first round, Obi almost has to be part of it, it seems like.
He doesn't have to be. I mean, they have all these. So they had those 4 seconds, right? Like, so the Portland trade they made for Hart was lottery protected first. If the pick didn't convey, they would give them 4 seconds. And my thinking since the trade deadline has been that like these 4 or 5 seconds that you're seeing, that's roughly the equivalent value of a first round pick, of a late first round pick. And I think the Knicks could use seconds to just move into the first round. Like the Pacers have 26 and 29. I think the Hornets have like 27, 34. They have a bunch, and I think they might have 39 or something too. Like you have opportunities.
The second pick, obviously. So
right. So like they have, I think they'll have opportunities to move into that late first, even without trading Obi.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's all I had. So
Word. All right, I have nothing else. So, Stacy, let the people know where they can find you and plug anything you'd like to plug.
You can find me at Stacy Patton 89. I'll continue to plug the work on Draft Strickland. If you're interested in some of the guys at the end of the first, Prez is doing a lot of stuff, and our WNBA coverage, especially focusing on the Liberty at the Strickland. So yeah.
Word. I have nothing to plug, so I will also plug all the work at the Strickland, the WNBA stuff on the Liberty, the draft stuff that Prez and you and others are putting out, and all the different podcasts that we have coming out. So All right, that is our podcast today, and that is brought to you by betonline.ag, our wonderful, wonderful sponsor. So that, again, is our pod for today. I hope everybody has a great week, and I will see you on Friday.